Hi, this is Eric Durak, and welcome to this edition of Santa Barbara Forum. I'm today's guest host, and today I have the honor of having Mr. Michael Bowker from 60 Degrees Publishing here in Santa Barbara as our guest. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, so I am fascinated with the Bowker name because of our previous conversations, but I'm going to hold up the book right now. The book that you have just published is called Beating Long Hauler Syndrome, and one of the more interesting revelations and components and all of the things that are sort of coming out of this whole COVID thing. And I want to really dive into it. We have an hour today, and so I want to make sure that we can cover as many things about this based on your expertise. I mean, you're not a doctor. You're actually a medical journalist, and you've written about everything from medicine to crime in your career. You've written thousands of articles, and you're on like book number 12 or 13 right now.
Number 23.
Number 23. So. I've written a few myself, and I know it's a hard thing to do. You've got to make sure that you get all these things done. But but beating long haulers, I want to sort of get some descriptions. I want to talk a little bit about it. I want to learn about the people that you interviewed who have long haulers. Some local people, and you've interviewed some folks around the country, and then some of the doctors that you've talked about. But I'm interested in, first and foremost, I want to dive a little bit into your professional career as not just an author, but an investigative journalist, because the profession of journalism in the last decade maybe has taken a little bit of a hit because of the whole, Good Morning America. I mean, he's not a journalist anymore. He's not a news person. He's more of an infotainment type person. But investigative journalists are a breed apart. Correct?
We're definitely
so, and I have a few names here. There's a gentleman who's doing a lot of investigating right now in the vaccine world, Jeffrey Jackson. The man is just completely spot on with everything he's doing. Christiane Amanpour, the lady from CNN who travels the world as an international investigative journalist. And she is so eloquent and so smart and really does her homework. You don't even know all the things, but you just know that she's so well versed. Greg Palast, I think one of the top investigative journalists of our time, who's investigated Hurricane Katrina and corruption in government. I mean, he's just all over the place. Jeremy Scahill, Amy Goodman, these people are really, really good at what they do. So my question is, based on some of these, the old guard, and then some new people coming in, do you still have a lot of hope that investigative journalism is still moving forward here in this country?
I'll always have hope. I mean, what's the point of not having hope? I think that what I've seen is the standard bearers of the past, the television shows, the newspapers, aren't upholding the investigative journalist banner like they used to. My hope is like the ones you just mentioned. Most of those are independent. Many are on podcasts.
Right.
And I'm thinking that the new way of presenting news through or information through podcasts, through direct streaming, I'm hoping that we can take some of the old values of journalism and bring them back, such as impartial investigations, and then tie them to the new technology. And we're going to come up with a whole new way of bringing credibility back to journalism. That's where my hope lies, and I don't see any reason why that can't happen.
Well, I remember when Greg Palast was doing his investigation about Hurricane Katrina, and he went to someone around the whatever, the Ninth Ward or was whatever, and then he was talking about this. He was talking with a lady who had been kicked out of her apartment during Hurricane Katrina, and they actually went to her apartment complex, which had been empty and padlocked for a couple of years, and he broke the padlock, and he went into her apartment, and everything, the table was still set, and he's like, well, what's going on here? And after a few months of investigating, he found out that there was a big corporation at one end of the block that wanted something, and then there was a huge corporation at the other end, and they literally wanted all of this land. and they had not the apartments had not been destroyed during the hurricane, but
there's lots of stories.
Lots of stories.
Lots of stories to investigate.
Right.
There's no question about no end to them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. But and again, I elaborate on this. It's hard to be an investigative journalist.
Well, it's harder than it ever has been. I have fewer outlets. I wrote for hundreds of different outlets in the past. Now many of them have narrowed down because they have a specific point of view. Mm-hmm. That's the difference between now and then, is that many of the television and newspapers and magazines have become advocates.
For something.
For something, whatever it is, they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't fit in their advocacy, then they don't want to hear from you. Yeah. Whereas in the past, the only filter was, is this a good news story?
Right.
And that's no longer the filter in a lot of areas. So a lot of us are moving around and trying to find where we can go with stories that aren't necessarily advocacy stories,
right,
but rather sheer news stories. This is what's happening, and let people decide what they want to do with it. What they're trying to do now on television and newspapers, etc., is we're going to tell you what's happening. We're going to tell you what you should think about it,
right,
and we're going to tell you what you can do and what you can't do.
Well, even your book, Beating Long Haulers Syndrome, is there's a certain point of view. I have a certain point of view about this, which probably wouldn't fit into a mainstream. I don't necessarily want to talk about all of my things, but I've done a lot of homework in this book. But just the whole thing, you just didn't write this. You had to interview people. You had to talk with doctors. You had to sort of go back and sort of look at, well, was this person saying correct, and then this was this and whatever, and you have to sort of put the chess pieces together. And I want to go back to one of the quintessential stories of the 20th century, which was Watergate and all the president's men. And I just remember watching the movie and well, we've got these leads. Oh my God, you can't do that. That's going to take 6 months, or we can't pay you to do that. But they did it anyway, and I think it worked out for them. But like I say, you just don't have a lot of that today. But anyway, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I'm a huge fan of investigative journalists, because I'm actually watching yet another documentary on the assassination of John Kennedy. And I read The Legacy of Secrecy by Tom Hartman. This book's 900 pages thick. I mean, it's like crazy. So, all right, so I want to sort of take us back in history a little bit, because you have some fun stories about your career, and one of them is that you knew who I consider to be one of the greatest journalists and TV commentators of all time, Walter Cronkite. I mean, he was a favorite of all of ours when we were kids.
Yes, indeed.
And you have this thoughts about journalism that you actually talked about with him, some bar in Boston or something? I don't know. Tell us about this.
Well, it was actually in his office.
A bar in his office? No.
Essentially. I was doing a story on Charles Osgood.
Okay.
If you remember that.
I remember Charles Osgood.
And for Reader's Digest. Well, Walter Cronkite was one of Charles' best friends, and so was Dan Rather. So when I went back to New York, I got an interview with both of them. And the interview with Walter, I talked to him on the phone, but he said, come into my office. So I did, and it wasn't a very big office. And he opened the door himself and handed me a glass of scotch and said, come on in, Michael, and put your feet up and let's talk a while. And I felt like I'd come through the pearly gates.
There you go, yeah.
And so we did. We talked the afternoon away. I think one of the key things about Walter Cronkite that I like to bring up is in the 1990s, they did a national survey, and I can't remember who did it. It was like the New York Times or somebody like that. Who is the most trusted man in America?
Yep.
They give him about 30 or 40 names. Mm-hmm. Walter Cronkite won hands down.
Hands down, yeah.
And I bring this question up, could any journalist win that today? I don't think so. I think that we probably wouldn't even finish in the top 500. That's how much credibility has fallen off. Now, the people that you named here...
Right, Christiane Amanpour has a lot of clout in my book. I don't necessarily agree with everything, but she's really good at what she does.
But they aren't well known. They aren't Walter Cronkite. And you do hear about them. and it's great. I'm glad they're doing this. It's just that the people who now own most of the media
Right.
have trespassed and have utilized what they purchased, this newspaper, this magazine, this television station, to further their own interest. And the people who watch TV or read newspapers, they're not stupid. They see this, they feel this, and they go, who can I trust?
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. In the long run, that's what we should be trying to do. And that should be our goal, is to regain trust.
Right. So, and that sort of leads me. I want to sort of dive down here just a little bit. Is that when you look at how much different is this than William Randolph Hearst? You know, they're gonna read what I tell them to read.
I've thought about that myself.
You know, and so you have the muckrakers of 100 years
yellow
ago.
journalism, yeah.
The yellow journalism was around. So this is not something that's new per se.
No.
And you know, the thing about Walter Cronkite is that when I was a kid, he I think his last show was in 1981, so I was just in college. So I grew up with him, the evening news, and it was him and two other people. Now you got 500 news outlets, so you don't know who Jeffrey Jackson is. He's a pretty good investigative journalist, but he's on the Del Bigtree show, The High Wire. So he has a very, very narrow thing, and he's on a couple times a week, and he's got an audience of maybe 1 million people. Okay.
Well,
So.
I just think that that's why this has to be a collective effort. I don't think one journalist can turn this around. I think that journalism as a whole needs to begin to turn like the Titanic. The whole ship has to turn, or we're going to hit the ice.
But the difference, Walter Cronkite, and again, I loved Walter Cronkite, and one thing I wanted to say is, I never knew that he was a flaming liberal. He was a Democrat and a uber liberal. You never knew that.
Correct.
When he was on TV, he reported the news. He never gave you his opinion, except in the Vietnam War. And
I will tell you what he did say to me that is coming, and it's going to be in my new book, which should be out just before the beginning of the year. We were sitting back, and it was probably
over bourbons, right?
Yeah.
This is in his office. Okay.
And he said, you know, he said, those of us on television often don't write our own scripts. We most often don't do our own research. We are given something to read, and we read it.
Well, it's the teleprompter mentality, right?
And he pointed at me and he said, you guys are the real deal. Well, he didn't mean me. He didn't know who I was.
Right.
He meant
the investigative journalist.
Or the press. The printed newspapers and magazines. Whereas television has always been far more of a ratings game.
Yeah, it's a commercial endeavor, yeah.
It is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I don't either, actually.
I just wish people would understand there is a difference. There is a big difference, and now television is about the only thing people are getting information, where they're getting their information. But podcasts, I don't know if you've seen the numbers, but podcasts are...
Well, Joe Rogan
boom.
Joe Rogan is the new Walter Cronkite. He's got tattoos and marijuana, man. He is the new Walter. You know where he stands on pot for sure. He is but the thing is, but the thing is, he asks good questions too.
He is, and he has people from all angles coming on his show.
He gets scientists, he gets doctors, he gets God, some of these guys that he has like buddies of his who are in like media. They're sort of in the background of television and movies, or someone who's in the background of the rock and roll genre. So, I'm a friend of so-and-so, whatever. And so they'll talk about all these kind of things about people because they are friends or they used to work with them or whatever. But he does ask good questions, and he's changed his mind on a couple things.
He's a reason for hope. I mean, the guy is much more of a journalist than an awful lot of the professional journalists that you see.
Right, and I don't when he had Sanjay Gupta on the show with this whole ivermectin thing, he says, I took vitamins, I took ivermectin, I did this, and then they all went after him. All the mainstream media, he took a horse dewormer. And of course, and then when Gupta got on his show, he said, you're lying. You people are lying. This is 1 billion prescriptions here. This is one of the most prescribed drugs, and you're lying on your. Well, they didn't really do good. No, not them. You're the medical guy.
Ivermectin
he went
has
right
made
after
a comeback. Have you seen that?
Well, but
it's slowly underneath
Right,
everything,
exactly,
it's
because
made a comeback.
Right, but I'm saying that it should have never
been
have
raised.
in the first place.
I agree.
But this is the narrative of these like you just say. There's a narrative in mainstream medicine, and they're saying these things.
Yeah.
And this is my point. If it takes Joe Rogan, a bald guy with tattoos who vapes on a television, a podcast, to call these people out, there's an issue here, and it ain't with him because he's the guy that's wagging the finger. He's not the smartest, and he knows that.
I think he's smart. I think he's tough. I have
You know who he is, don't
you?
you? Oh my gosh, that guy is a martial artist.
What I'm saying is that he has taken a new technology. Basically, I mean, I'm saying new because
the podcast.
I'm not new.
Right.
But he's taken that to levels that we had no idea. So that's what gives me hope.
Right.
Is this can happen without anybody planning it, without anybody figuring it out, yet it happened organically. And I think it will continue to happen, Eric, because people want to be able to trust the information that they hear or see.
Right, and what I like about Joe Rogan and what I liked about Walter Cronkite, I mean, I was younger, but they're authentic. When he makes mistakes, he'll say so. I fucked up. Well, but I'm just saying that he's, like what Cronkite said to you is we really don't do all of the research, it's sort of fed to us. Whereas Rogan is trying to sort of change the narrative because, and there's a lot of really good podcasting people out there. I try to watch a few podcasts on a regular basis, and I dig them.
I think it's just going to keep improving.
Right.
This is what I've tried to do with this book. I tried to take a middle ground with there is no narrative in this book. There's no, this is good, this is bad, this type of thing is this, or this type of thing is that. The information in here is, this is just what it is.
Right. And so let's jump into it right now because I went from the first to the end with all the thing about investigative journalists because that sort of sets the stage for who you are, why what you do is important, and you're applying it to this book, right? You're applying investigate. You're trying to find what the hell's going on here. Why are all these people who are healthy getting sick, right? So explain to the viewers here what long hauler syndrome is, and it's based on someone's been infected with COVID, and they're just not getting better. So you've interviewed these docs. What was the consensus?
Well, that was the beginning of this one, as we talked about before, when my friends and one of my family members seemed to be coming down with something that was very odd, and took my friend to Cott's Hospital, actually, right here, and somebody dropped the term long haulers. And
so like a truckers convention in Vegas.
Well,
or something.
no, but I knew that if it was applied to medicine, and they knew this term, that this was something I hadn't heard of, and your little journalistic flags go up.
Right.
I just zeroed in on it and said, "What is this? What is this? And why do you think he has this?" And they explained to me then that it was 1 out of, and it depends on the statistics you look at.
Right.
Typically, 1 out of 5. Or up to 3 out of 5 people who have had COVID gets long-term symptoms. And these symptoms are...
Well, they're pulmonary.
Oh, there are over 150 symptoms.
Right.
They're
fatigue,
brain fog,
neurological disorder. Yeah, you can go on and on. But when you look at nervous system, pulmonary system, and fatigue, those are the big deals, because I mean, like one of your people.
Well, there are a lot of them. I cover probably the 50 most common in here, in the book, but they are saying now, and I wanted to get you these numbers because these are brand new numbers right off Science Daily. Just got information from Penn State. They did a worldwide study, and they believe as many as 150 million people have long COVID. Now, this is directly connected with COVID. You get COVID, then you seem to feel better for a month to 6 weeks, and all of a sudden, these strange symptoms start coming in. You have brain fog, you have fatigue. There's just a variety of things, and you're going, you don't make the connection that had to do with COVID, but it does. It's exactly
in your book, you actually sort of say, after a while, the doctors you really sort of can't deny it anymore.
Well, many doctors still, and these are mid-level doctors typically. This is why in this book I went to the doctors. I went to an NIH director who's at the same level as Fauci, the head of the Mayo Clinic, of Mount Sinai, of Johns Hopkins, of Stanford.
So locally, you had somebody down in UCLA or
just about UCLA, USC,
and then here locally, you spoke with our infectious disease person here.
Correct. So, but basically, I called and talked to the top doctors in the world because I wanted them to say to me, "This is not in the patient's heads," because at the time, these doctors can't figure something out. A lot of doctors still do this.
Yes.
They can't figure something out. They say, "Oh, must be in your head. It's all, you're depressed.
Right.
We're going to give you some kind of mental treatment."
Right.
And I wanted these doctors to tell me directly, this is not in their heads. And every one of them did. Every one of them said, this is a real physical disease. And if you'll go in here,
actually, I have. I got notes in my book too.
Well, but I put all of their singular quotes saying it's not in the patient's head into one page that you can copy. And I suggested to anybody who has this to take that page into your doctor and say, if you're saying it's in my head, now you're arguing with all these people.
Right.
Not me. You're arguing with the head of the
PASS
NIH,
by any other
the head
name.
of Mayo Clinic.
So and PASS stands for post-acute SARS-CoV-2.
Well, we can talk about how it got that name too, because that's a whole story.
Okay,
in
that's
itself.
but
my point here is, this book is about the affirmation that this is a real disease, this is a real issue, and now 150 million people have it. And Eric, the information I just picked up is that it's now costing American businesses more money than diabetes.
Yeah.
Because the workers are not coming to work and they're having to pay health care.
Right.
So long COVID now outpaces diabetes.
And diabetes is bad enough.
Employer health care costs.
Yeah, diabetes is
one of the biggest diseases in America. So what I'm trying to impress upon people here is that this isn't some kind of mental thing that people have and that doesn't have a definition. It does, and the best doctors in the world will tell you that. It does have a definition. It is a major problem, and it's getting worse.
Right. So I know that your reason for writing the book and your sort of mantra is that you're just trying to find things out. And I've done a number of shows here, I've interviewed a number of people in the vaccine world and I've, in the legal world about vaccines and of course I'm also looking at the issues here with the SARS-CoV virus in and of itself and the spike protein, and is this a weaponized virus and all these other kind of things. And it's like, but when you look at people who have a disease and like chronic fatigue syndrome, where did chronic fatigue syndrome come from?
Very, very similar.
Well, exactly, and I know why. This is, and I'm gonna dive on just a little bit, but I'm gonna pull myself back because I don't want to get too deep in the woods. I interviewed on this TV show Dr. Judy Mikovits, who used to work with Anthony Fauci, and she worked with Robert Gallo when they were doing the HIV and AIDS work, and she actually discovered the XMRV virus, which was the virus that caused chronic fatigue syndrome. And so she couldn't find out where this virus came from. And she, 20,000, 30,000, whatever. And she says, so then they went back and they looked at how many people had a flu shot. And then they actually looked at the ingredients of the flu shot and they found that the viral component was in the flu shot. So she's saying, okay, so these people are getting a shot that has an adjuvant in there. And one of the things about this adjuvant, which is supposed to stimulate an immune response, is having down the road and sort of, this unintended consequences, like a lot of medications. You take a medication for this and it may cause something down the road. And that's sort of the road that she went. I don't want to get too deep into the woods about that, but the long haulers is these people have all had COVID. And COVID is something that is, I'm going to say, a heavy version of the flu. Some people that get it get really, really sick. Okay,
Many have died.
and
yeah.
that and some of them die. But I'm saying that but people die of the flu as well. And I don't want to make a comparison per se, other than the fact that they're both in the coronavirus family. So biologically, they're both sort of flu things. But
in the fact that we don't know 2 years after, we really don't know. We're still talking. This person says this. That person says this.
Right.
Okay. More than a year ago, I'm talking to Dr. Nath, who is the head of infectious or neurological section of the NIH. This guy is one of the top guys, and he says, okay, Fauci came out with $1.5 billion for studies into long COVID.
Right.
Okay.
Actually, right.
Okay. Now, what I was told a year ago was that money by this time, this year, would be manifest itself in treatments and cures. That they're going to find treatments and cures.
And
I haven't seen one treatment. I haven't seen one cure. I haven't seen one report from any of these so-called studies that were supposedly done on long COVID. And the reason that I'm intense about this is because I have talked to hundreds of people that have this.
yeah.
For example, one of a guy that has become a friend of mine is a Navy SEAL. Toughest guy, you know.
Is he in the book? I know Navy SEAL.
He's in the book. Okay. And it came down with long COVID, and it got worse, and it got worse, and it got worse. And along with many people that I've talked to, one of the options they consider is suicide. This is how nasty it is.
No, that's not really. I mean, that's an option, but it's like the last resort type thing. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm not saying that it's an option. I'm saying that these people mentioned this to me.
They've considered that they're at the end of the road.
I'm not making judgment on that. I'm saying that the people I talked to said that to me, which tells me that they are truly suffering.
Yeah.
To even think anywhere close to that means you are suffering.
Yes.
Okay, so talking to this fellow who's a Navy SEAL, I talked to him again 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's had this for almost 2 years, year and a half. He's had to completely retire. He's had complete disability. He said that at the time we talked, he had about 10% of his strength back. He said now he's got about 40%, but that it's stabilized and it's not getting any better. The reason I'm bringing this story up is that I've talked to many, many people around the country, in Europe, in Australia, in Africa, and people are suffering tremendously from this. And I am not seeing an equivalent reaction from the medical community, from the government, from anybody to try to help these people.
But here's my point. And again, I don't want to jump off in another deep end, but the government, the CDCs basically said, and I'm going to quote a couple studies because I know a lot of this stuff, is that there was the guy named Dr. Bronfman from Detroit, Michigan, who did studies in high-dose vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc early on with a couple hundred patients.
Okay, my point here is nobody knows. This guy will say this guy will say that. You can bring up all the studies you want. I've seen them. But there is no concerted, centralized effort.
Right, but Dr. Bronfman,
and
here the studies that we talked about here with long haulers with hyperbaric oxygen, these things are almost 100% effective. But they're not government programs; they're independent people that are doing independent things.
This is your information and my information don't coincide a lot. So I'm just hoping your viewers know that this is
right. But I'm not quoting. I mean, I'm quoting from here. Royal College of Physicians. These are clinical studies that have been done. Yeah. It's not. This might be an article, but these, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy I've been looking at for about 10 years is a very highly effective treatment for certain types of things.
That part of the problem when you have long haulers is a lack of oxygen. There is no doubt about that. But you said my book was about presenting information. It's more than that. If you read it, I make a strong pitch Many times in this book, I have been on many podcasts. I make this pitch every time. I'm going to make it here. I believe that the U.S. Congress needs to come up with a minimum of $50 billion to study this, to put it into play, to present it to Big Pharma. I mean, as much as we doubt Big Pharma, they are pretty good about doing certain things. But this kind of this kind of motivation needs to be put out there for someone to come up with cures and treatment. We've got nothing. Everybody has. If you go online, Eric, to the groups that are that have
like long haulers
haulers
type groups,
yes,
right?
They'll talk
Support
about
groups.
tea. They'll talk about this. Everybody has different. There's 150 different things every
Right.
single day that people say this will help. This will help. Come on. Some of them may. Some of them may not. We need for the government and the medical industry to start taking this seriously and to look into it, because it's not only long haulers, but as you were talking about, chronic fatigue very well could have the same kind of treatments and cures.
Right.
We're talking
Right.
perhaps over the next 10 or 15 years, this could affect 1 billion people or more.
Right.
And we're not looking into it. We're not doing any
Well,
studies.
So let me ask
So
you
it's
a
making
question. This
sense.
is one of the big questions that came about, is like, because I come from the fitness world, and there were two interesting studies, one from the UK in 2020, late 2020, and then one in the US in mid to late 2021, that looked at fitness levels and severity of COVID. And there's an inverse relationship. The higher your fitness level, the lower your COVID symptoms. Who came down with COVID-19 the most? Obesity and diabetes. So if you're looking for people who already have metabolic insufficiency, right? So when you're looking at funding,
that doesn't hold true for
well,
long
okay,
COVID.
right? But that's okay. So one of you have a friend here in Santa Barbara. I'm not going to mention his name. Athletic guy. You've talked about the guy from San Diego. I don't know if he's San Diego, but the former Navy SEAL. So these are very fit people. Yeah. And my thing is that fitness in and of itself, we know enhances the immune system. We know has changes the hormonal system. It has great benefits for the body in general, physiologically.
Unfortunately, that doesn't work in that simple mathematical pattern. I agree with you 100%, but not in long haulers for some reason. For example, COVID. Everybody knew it was an old person's disease, right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty, and everyone assumes that's the case for long COVID.
Right.
It's not.
What's the average age for long haulers?
Here it says, older adults are less likely to have long, this is from CDC. Okay. Are less likely to have long COVID than younger adults. Nearly 3 times as many adults between 50 and 60 get it than people who are over 60. Overall, 1 in 13 adults in America, 1 in 13 adults have long COVID. This is from the CDC.
Okay, so
nobody is doing any studies on this.
And do you, but I'm asking you just an investigative journalism question. Why do you think they have? What have they been exposed to? Like our gentleman here in Santa Barbara, the Navy SEAL guy.
Isn't that the question of the day, Eric?
Well, I mean, because I know people who've had it twice.
You're talking about COVID.
COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, does everyone? All right. So let me step back again. Let me ask my
COVID
first,
and long COVID are different.
Are different, right? But you have to have been exposed to and had SARS-CoV-2 in order to come down with.
But you can be asymptomatic
and still come down with long haul.
Absolutely.
Okay. So here's another thing about, and then I want to interject the vaccine question, because are there a higher percentage of people who are vaccinated? Because now we're looking at, they always said, it's those anti-vaccine people. But now 2 years into this, we're looking at the major amount of hospitalizations, severity, and deaths are now coming from people who've had 2 or 3 vaccine doses. That's another. That's
another book. That's another book, and that's worth looking into.
Right.
I don't have information on that.
Oh, I got about 6,000 studies.
There you go. Well, you're the expert on that.
Right, but I'm saying but I'm not an expert in COVID, because I spent most of my career looking at childhood vaccines, both from the physiologic. So, all right, and the reason I did this is because when I moved to Santa Barbara, as we spoke when we met, I worked at Sansom Research Foundation in diabetes research. So I did a combination of exercise research and just basic physiology. And one question I asked my boss, Dr. Peterson, I said, Chuck, how does a person come down with type 1 diabetes? How does their own pancreas crap out on them? And he couldn't answer the question. So I decided.
No one has.
Well, that's not true. There are a lot of people who have answered. Well, so the beta cells of the pancreas, they have certain enzymes or whatever, and there is a virus called the Coxsackie B virus that is known both, physiologically and epidemiologically to have a higher incidence rate of type 1 diabetes. So almost everyone who has type 1 diabetes has a prevalence of these Coxsackie B viral agents within the pancreatic cells, and they happen to go after the beta cells, not the somatic cells or alpha cells. They go after the beta cells. They produce the insulin, so they're the ones that crap out. Where does this come from? It comes from the DTaP shot. So children who have multiple shots of diphtheria pertussis have a higher rate of these. Again, they're just adjuvants in the shot. But the Coxsackie B viral agent.
You should be writing a book about that. This is information
but
I don't.
Remember what
I don't
you
know
said.
about.
I don't know if we said it on camera or off, but there's a narrative here. And what I talk about is based on research, because you know where I got my information? Cottage Hospital back in the 90s.
Okay, the problem that I have is that there are bits and pieces of information all over the place about long COVID, about type 1 diabetes.
Right.
And you can choose to believe because it makes sense to you. You're an educated guy, you've studied this, and you're going to choose to believe this because it makes sense to you, right? Well, in my view, when you're looking at science, you're looking at medicine particularly, there needs to be all these different studies done on these issues, especially ones that affect millions of people, like diabetes and like long haulers. Then we take all these multiple studies, and we put them all out on the table, and we say, okay, now we can compare them, and we can see which ones really make sense. But when the studies are done haphazardly by one person over here, one person over there, this one may be exactly right.
Right.
But let me finish.
Okay, go ahead.
But the scientific method is, it needs to be tested. It needs to go against other information that maybe doesn't agree with it. And when it's like John Stuart Mill, it's like the collision of ideas brings truth. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is, we don't have enough studies being done to understand that there's not enough collision going on for us to come out and say, you know what, all these studies have been done, and it seems pretty clear that this is what we need to do. And that's step one.
Right. And I agree with you that we're not anywhere near that here. Okay. This is only a couple years old.
Step two, well, this should have been figured out already. I mean, come on. We have some of the most brilliant people in the world.
I know, but still, it does take time, because the collision that you talk about is
that there's no studies being collided at all. There's no studies on this table.
I have some thoughts on that, but keep going. I want to hear, because
so you're
marching down a good road here.
Yeah. Step one is to initiate these studies, done by people who don't have a narrative, by people who don't have an economic piece in the pie. But let me finish this. Let me finish. That's step one.
Okay.
Now, step two is equally critical, and that is, when we do have this information that is caused, perhaps COVID stays in the body, perhaps like herpes and some other things, viruses,
shingles or something like that.
It never leaves the body. Now, this is a possibility. Nobody's ruling this out. Nobody's saying it is true. Right. Nobody knows. Well, how come we don't know? But then it could be that something you do because of your body, something you eat, something occurs that triggers those viruses back again. Okay, I'm not saying this is the answer at all. But I'm saying what we need to do is figure it out, what causes this. Then step two is, what are the cures and treatments?
Right.
We're not even to step one yet.
Right.
This is what's making me crazy. It's why I'm passionate about this, Eric.
No, and I get it, because I always tell people, I said, like with something like exercise and nutrition. Nutrition is a very tough area of science, because people eat lots of different things many times during a day. Some people, when you exercise, most people only exercise 3 times a week. But I'm saying you have clinical trials,
So
you
you're
have,
telling
you have
me
animal trials.
French fries may not cure this. Is that
Quite,
okay?
just
I love French fries.
But you look at animal studies that are pertinent, because a lot of animal studies do not translate to human studies. But you look at phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials, you look at epidemiology trials, and then you look at meta-analyses, right? So that's your smorgasbord right there. You've said that if you can put all those things together, I think with long haulers we're not at the meta-analysis stage, because there wasn't studies done 10 years ago. They're still trying to figure out. But here's my narrative, and again, I dig what you're saying. You're like, you want these guys to do these things because this is the way it's supposed to be done. But
no, let me ask you a question. If you think it should last 10 years before we can figure out, why is it that we came up with a vaccine within a few months of when COVID came out?
But my narrative is the vaccine is part of the problem. It's not part of the solution.
All I'm saying is that they said it's a solution.
Well,
why aren't they rushing this?
Okay. That's a whole nother show, and again, I'm not diving off that deep end, because I look at what these vaccine companies, they have no legal liability for their product. They did, for this last booster, animal study with 8 mice, and they put something on the market. There's no phase 1, phase 2.
The government approved it, and what I'm saying is
then your viewpoint of science has just been crushed by a bunch of globalists.
Let me be more clear.
Okay, please do.
I'm not saying that they're right because the government. I'm not saying the government is right. I take no position on the vaccines at all. Okay, in this discussion, I have my own opinions about it. What I'm saying is that everybody moved at the speed of light when it came to vaccines. I'm asking for people to move just a little bit faster when it comes to dealing with this.
I completely agree with you.
That's all I'm asking for, and I'm asking for $50 billion.
Right. Okay.
Eric, let me give you this symbol. Okay. If you take a football field and you take $100 bills, you put them all over this football field.
All right.
You take $1 trillion, it'll make a stack 30 feet high, all the way across the football field. Mm-hmm. Okay, $1 billion won't even fill up the back of a small pickup truck. So if you took $50 billion, you wouldn't even notice off this football field that it's gone. Well, we have been spending trillions on roads, on infrastructure. Mm-hmm. What's $50 freaking billion when you're talking about 150 million people worldwide who are sick?
I absolutely agree with you, but you can look at cancer treatments. And you can go down the road with cancer treatments. We've got newer and better chemotherapy. We've got new and better radiation treatments, whatever. But there are cancer treatments like Royal Rife, PEMF, et cetera, that have had really good results and outcomes for 50, 60 years that don't fit into the narrative. So that $50 billion may only funnel into one area. And I'm not saying...
there has to be oversight. That's what's missing in a lot of this.
But the problem with the pharmaceuticals right now is that they have, I believe, co-opted much of medicine. You can agree or
no, not the pharmaceutical.
But so like I say, so if you give them an extra $50 billion and you generally want this to be cured, and I would too, because I look at chronic fatigue, I look at some of these things like, I certainly would not want this. I certainly would not have to walk around all day, not even be able to get out of bed based on the physical activity level that I'm at this stage in my life. And I'm not a young guy anymore. You know what I mean? But I've been exercising for 50 years and I have a certain lifestyle. If I were diagnosed, and I just remember when I got sick with COVID, there were a couple days I was out. I mean, it is a tough thing.
You don't want to stop an investigation into cures and treatments because you don't trust Big Pharma. We got the devil over here, we got the devil over here. So you can't just say, well, we're not going to do any studies because we don't trust Big Pharma. We can't make that choice. These people are too sick. We have got to go with what we can.
Right, but one of the things that my boss at Sansom told me is that, most drugs mask symptoms. Most drugs are not cures, because if we cured disease, diabetes wouldn't be here. If we cured cancer, cancer wouldn't be here.
Well, I had polio when I was a kid, and they've pretty much done away with that. There's a whole lot of things they've done away with, a whole lot of things they've blown.
Right.
No doubt about
Right.
it. I'm saying that we can't sit and wait for perfection.
And I'm absolutely agree
We've
with
got
you
to move forward as
100%.
fast as we can with
Right.
the best people that we can, and then we've got. Maybe it's not a drug that cures us. Maybe it's
maybe
this.
it's a combination. This is
I
the
agree.
way that I look at medicine.
I agree.
I look at hyperbaric oxygen therapy as a non-invasive thing that pressurizes
I don't
the
disagree
body.
with that at all.
So there may be a medication that would work 5 times better if it were used in conjunction with HBOT.
That's what I want studied.
Right.
That's
Right.
what I want
Because
studied.
these guys are absolutely convinced that, all right, very small number of patients, improve cognition, improve fatigue, improve executive function, et cetera, et cetera. These guys are pretty convinced, and this is the London Clinical Medicine Royal College of Physicians from November 2021, that HBOT in small groups of people, and there's a few of these types of studies that are showing really, really good promise and no side effects. So if it doesn't have side effects and you've got a promising drug, combine.
Well, I agree. I don't believe it's one thing, but I think it can be a combination of things, but we're not looking at it. No one's looking at it.
Right.
I mean, if we're going to get our money from the government, we're going to study one little thing.
Right.
We want everybody else to go away. Well, we can't take that attitude.
Right.
And this is why I think we need to put enormous pressure on Congress. And I have talked to the groups, the long COVID groups, and said, you can talk about tea all day long, and I think it's important, but I also think what's critical is for all of you to get together, put some money into getting somebody in Congress who can do your bidding and go after every one of these congressional members and say, you know, we are going to announce to all of our millions of
Followers,
followers, are you for us or against us?
Yeah.
Are you for looking into solutions, or are you just going to sit there and pretend it doesn't happen? And it's not happening. It is happening. And I can't quite get these groups, because this isn't in their wheelhouse to deal in Congress.
I know exactly what you're talking about,
it's
because
out of where they're comfortable.
I've been involved with a number of medical freedom groups, and they were very upset with the whole masking and this, you know, well, our freedom's this, freedom that. I said, well, what are you doing about it? Who are you talking to about it? And besides our group here, because we have really we got really nice pastries tonight. And the thing is that, you know, I was involved with a racketeering lawsuit 5 years ago against a state senator because I was upset, and I went after this guy, and they were afraid. They were absolutely afraid. And Bobby Kennedy's done the same thing. He's gone after, you know, some of these people legally, and that moves the dial. And I'm not saying you have to sue your way into this, but
I want to recruit. I want to recruit congressional members by saying, we are going to put you on the front of we're going to put you on the front of our newsletter. We're going to put you on our website with a big gold star that said, this guy is a hero for us.
Yeah.
This guy is a great guy. When he comes up to election, let's all vote for him.
Right.
You're going to get a lot. I don't know if you know, but I was a speechwriter for a guy.
I do know, yes. That's because
mayor of Los
Bruce
Angeles.
gave me all of your info.
You get far more distance out of recruiting than you do out of threatening, I believe, in the internal world of politics. And these groups need to get together, send somebody to Congress who can go into the room and say, you know what, you are going to have a whole bunch of people on your side and here's the bill. Somebody should write the bill for them that says this amount of money goes here. We have this kind of oversight on the research, because if you don't have oversight, it'll go right into somebody's pocket.
So let me ask you a couple questions. So you're familiar with a lot of national long haulers support groups or internet sites?
Oh, I know about them.
5 or 6 or whatever. So it would be interesting if there was an internet, I'm just going to use the term an internet site or a support group that actually did hyperbarics or did high dose vitamin C or did something, and then you had a survey of all these groups and said, what 2 or 3 things are you guys doing that really work best? And then let's funnel that in and then go to the Congress and say, let's do a combination of things. What are the 5 things that work the best?
You know, someone from Cottage Hospital actually came to me about a year ago and said, we want to do a study on people who have overcome long haulers.
Right.
What do they have in common?
What do those people?
I said I'm on board.
I would be on board with that too.
I don't want any money for this. I will be on board. I will do all the research I possibly can do, and I haven't heard from them since.
Well, that's why you're on my show tonight, or you're on.
But I agree with that entirely. Right. I think we should find out what has worked and why.
Exactly. Because if there's 10% of the people who have completely, I'm going to say, cured or mitigated all the symptoms,
right,
and they've been that way for a while and they haven't had a relapse.
What commonalities
do
they have?
Their age, their body fat, their physical prowess, their genetic history. You know, maybe Europeans are better than African Americans at something. You know what I mean? I don't know this. I don't know much about this at all. You know a lot, but you're right. But they may have something in common with nutrition. Nutrition is such a huge thing for most diseases. All diseases have a nutritional component to them, whether it helps make them worse or helps make them better. And anybody who studied nutrition sciences knows that. But it's something they have, it's not even I don't even know if it's in your book. You know what I mean? But that's not your wheelhouse. But I'm saying that from the doctors who are involved with what I read from the docs here.
Nutrition is directly related to inflammation.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And inflammation, without question, is deeply embedded in what's going wrong with these people, whether it's in the brain, whether it's in your stomach, whether it's in the blood vessels. So does nutrition have to do with this? Absolutely. I talked with one woman, she's 23 years old. She's really suffering from this badly.
23.
She said, every time I eat pizza, I get very sick for a week.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't mean all the pizza people out there. I love pizza.
I love pizza too.
I eat pizza. But
a lot of pizzas.
For her, it didn't work. For whatever, and who knows what was in there. All I'm saying is that nutrition has to be a part of it. Getting oxygen needs to be a part of it. Cutting down in inflammation. Is there a reason that these people who suffer keep suffering? The problem is, we cannot point the finger at them and say, well, you do this, you're under stress, and you don't handle stress well. That is the last place that anybody should go to blame the people who are sick.
Well, this
it
is not
not
a
their fault. They don't want to be sick.
Nobody,
And it has nothing to do with their stress levels. I don't think stress has a whole lot to do with this. I think it is physical.
Like I say, I don't know enough.
But then that's why you don't call me Dr. Michael, because I'm
not
a doctor.
But
everybody should remember that.
But here's where, and we've got 5 minutes to go, and I want to get into your next book here. But in the commonality here is that this is pretty serious, and it really is affecting a lot more people than most people don't really know about it. So you're bringing this to life. So
one out of every 13 Americans has
good
this.
on you. The second thing is that there are people who are trying to sort of form these things, and I think that another good thing, if you want to appropriate money, I think there may be a combination of things here. That because I don't want to have just another vaccine, because a lot of people, that's not going to be the answer. But a combination of things so we've really answered a couple really awesome questions here tonight. So you are not just a long haulers, investigative guy. You're coming out with a new book, which I also find fascinating. And this book is called No Ordinary Days. So in the next few minutes, just talk a little bit about how in the heck did this come about?
I appreciate you bringing that up, Eric.
No Ordinary Days.
Typically, you get on talking about the book you've done before, and you're so ready to talk about the ones you're just finishing.
Yeah.
And it is done. It'll be out before. But it is, as I mentioned to you, I've probably done 4,000 articles.
Yes,
and
many.
20-some books. And I chose my very favorite articles that I've done. And one, for example, is on the Golden State Killer. I got deeply involved with that from the very beginning, and at one point, too involved, and it was scary.
One of the things that I read about you've done interviews with people in prison.
Yes, serial killers. So about
that's creepy.
About a fourth of the stories are true crime, and they're astounding. And the way I built this book, it's not just the articles that I did. I worked for Reader's Digest for about 10 years, so many of them the more original dramas. So it's got true crime, it's got stories of insane courage. I'll tell you one very quickly. I did a story on a guy who was in prison because he was selling marijuana. This was back in the old day, right? He's 21 years old. He's in 5 years for like having 100 joints. So he got out to help fight fires with the inmate firefighting crew, right? Down in Malibu, in an incredibly courageous act. He went into a burning house, went second floor, got this woman's autistic child, and came out. You know, he's on fire, everybody's on fire, but everybody was safe, no one was really hurt. So he got this nice accommodation, went back to prison where I interviewed him, okay? 22 years later, I called him. This is 2 months ago. I said, Ken, what's been going on with your life? I'm doing this book and I want an after. What happened after is on every single story. And he says, I have felt guilty for 20 years that I haven't called you. He said, everybody saw that story. I got on TV. The governor of California read it and pardoned me within a month.
Wow.
And he says, I got out. I had a tough time getting a job because they don't like to give ex-cons jobs. Somebody saw that story, gave me a job. Now I head up their computer system worldwide. He said, I'm the head of 7,500 computers. And he said, I got a nice house, everything. And every 2 weeks, I go to a school and I talk to kids that no matter what happens to you in your life, you can always have a second chance. That's the kind of story that's in this book. There's what drew me to the story itself, then what happened after. And what happened after sometimes is spectacular, blows the original story out. But there are many like that. There's international romance about a Chinese spy and an American professor. There are stories of courage. There's outdoor stories of adventure. And then there's a good package of environmental stories, because that's always been part of my passion.
So when you said the book is coming out maybe in a few months, right?
Yeah, it'll be coming out the first part of December.
Okay, so we'll have to do another interview.
Michael Bowker's No Ordinary Days.
No Ordinary Days. And where would somebody get it?
Well, my website is
60 Degrees Publishing.
60 Degrees Publishing, spelled out.
And they have it on the banners here. So.
That's the temperature, by the way. It has to be before butterflies can fly, because they're okay. Or they can get it at Amazon. I have an international publishing or distribution, so they'll be able to get it at Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Okay, fantastic.
But I will sign it if they buy it off my website.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to get one, because we talked a little bit about before. So the music here is we're coming to a close. This is a great interview, and like I say, I loved reading the book. I have my opinions, but I really liked and the passion that you bring into this stuff from the investigative side. I've always been a big fan of investigative journalists, so I appreciate you being on the show. This was a really good hour.
We had a good time.
Fantastic. So Michael Bowker, 60 Degrees Publishing, No Ordinary Days, and Beating Long Haulers. This is a very interesting read. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.